President-elect Joe Biden has announced several of his top cabinet picks, naming his longtime close advisor and former Deputy Secretary of State Antony Blinken as his choice to be the next Secretary of State. Hello and a very warm welcome to WION-VOA Co-Production, our special presentation on US election. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Now, while Donald Trump has signaled his willingness to leave the White House, President-elect Joe Biden is all set with his top cabinet picks. VOA's diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain brings us more on Antony Blinken, who's known as a staunch supporter of international alliances, human rights and refugees.
Iran made a fundamental choice.
Antony Blinken served as Deputy Secretary of State during the former Obama-Biden administration and has been advising President-elect Joe Biden since 2002. He graduated from high school in Paris, France, and is a strong supporter of NATO and other alliances and multilateral institutions. Blinken led the U.S. response to a global refugee crisis, and in 2016, he appeared on the American children's show Sesame Street to explain who refugees are and how we can all learn from each other.
These are people who've had to leave their homes because life in their countries was not safe for them. Grover, can you imagine how difficult it would be to have to leave your home?
No, I cannot. I would never want to leave Sesame Street.
Some analysts say Blinken's first priority will be to repair relationships and rejoin agreements President Donald Trump quit, like the Iran nuclear deal and others.
I think his first and most major priority will be restoring the perception of the United States as a trusted ally and partner around the world. I think he's going to want to shore up relationships that were damaged. Essentially, the mantra is we're back. Re-enter the United States into the Paris Climate Accords. Trying to find a way potentially to extend the New START agreement.
In another announcement, veteran diplomat Linda Thomas Greenfield is Biden's choice to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations.
But what I did have, I had the hopes and the dreams of my mother, who taught me at a very early age that I could face any challenge or adversity put in my path.
If confirmed by the Senate, Blinken would assume State Department leadership from Mike Pompeo, who has served as Secretary of State since April 2018. Cindy Sain, VOA News, Washington.
Getting a sense of perspective on the transition and cabinet picks, and for that let's go across to Voice of America's Nova Pravati, who's joining us live at this hour from Washington DC. Greetings to you, Nova. Good to have you back. Now, there's quite a relief in Washington as the presidential transition is finally happening from an administrative viewpoint. Could you explain what to expect in the coming days?
Well, Akanksha, it was certainly a huge sigh of relief, especially for the Biden camp, for the transition to officially, administratively begin. Now, a lot has been said about the $6 million budget that is now being released for this transition. But outside of that, of course, this is a very important process. Whereas for most viewers, especially international viewers, the election usually only comes into the news during election day, during the time the election is called. And there's nothing spoken about it or reported about it until inauguration on January 20th. But of course, a lot goes on behind the scenes. It's not only the White House that changes occupants. It's also some 15 federal agencies that are under cabinet positions, and also hundreds of other federal agencies and entities that have to change leadership. And it's sort of like the handing over of the key, so to speak, for a new occupant versus an old occupant. There needs to be a lot of communication between incoming teams and outgoing teams, as far as a lot of secret information and a lot of classified information. And now we're finally seeing this proceed formally with the transition process.
Right.
Now, Joe Biden himself has formed from the get-go a transition team, and he started now to announce a lot of his team members, starting with national security, and a lot of them are experienced hands, as you've mentioned. But of course, interestingly, this is also something that has assured a lot of people, assured the markets with the what wasn't mentioned in our report and is still being reported is Janet Yellen, the former Federal Reserve chairperson, as finance secretary. So this is something that's being warmly welcomed among a lot of circles because it's a return to normalcy and also certainty. But at the same time, we also see a lot of senators, Republican senators with 2024 aspirations say that this is just more of the same, an establishment. And so, one election cycle ends, a new one begins, Akansha. And so we can already start to report on the 2024 elections that based on the reaction to these cabinet appointments.
Right. Since you mentioned the new cycle that is beginning, a lot of people who are in India and, of course, in Asia itself are very curious about the United States foreign policy. What can we expect from a future Biden administration, including the foreign policy, of course?
Well, the selection of Antony Blinken was interesting because he is a multilateralist, as you mentioned, and as mentioned in our previous report. There is a sentiment in the incoming Biden administration for America to rejoin its international obligations, international deals that were left by the U.S. under the previous administration, the Iran nuclear deal, the Paris Climate Agreement. Those are the things that the U.S. is keen under Biden is keen on rejoining. In announcing his national security team, Biden said America is back. That seems to be the mantra of the incoming administration, that America is back and reliable in terms of alliances and also international agreements. America is also likely to rejoin the WHO, World Health Organization. America is likely to rely on its allies in dealing with similar threats like China, the rise of China. You'll also see perhaps less discrepancy between substance and style and personality versus policy in terms of foreign policy, because as we discussed before as well, after making disparaging remarks about India's air quality during the presidential debates, after President Trump made such disparaging remarks, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually made a military deal, a security deal with India. So there's always been this discrepancy between what goes on at the ministerial level, secretary level, and also between the presidential level. That's likely not to be the case in a Biden administration. There's going to be perhaps more consistency. You expect to get what the president says. We also saw in terms of international aid, President Trump has always been more America first. He's always been more for slashing international aid, whereas behind the scenes, apparently, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo still advocates foreign aid as parts of efforts to bolster also American influence abroad. So you'll see a lot more consistency from top to bottom, perhaps in a foreign policy standpoint. And as a background, Joe Biden has been very experienced in foreign policy. He was a senator since 1973. And as Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years, he also took a lot of foreign policy under his portfolio. So we can expect a lot more consistency and also experienced hands among the national security team, which is something President Trump went through so many secretaries of state, secretaries of defense, that sometimes even at that level, there hasn't been much consistency. But at least at the Biden administration, we can expect a little bit more consistency.
Right. Well said, Nova. Of course, a lot more consistency and experience. But having said that, there are a host of challenges that are awaiting the U.S. president-elect, with coronavirus cases surging across the U.S. More people who want to travel to be with family for the Thanksgiving holiday got tested for the coronavirus. Lines are so long now that people are waiting for hours to be swabbed. Here's a report by Voice of America.
The U.S. has doubled its daily COVID-19 testing numbers since the summer. But it's not enough to keep up with demand, as the virus has infected more than 12.4 million people and caused more than 250,000 deaths. At a walk-in clinic in Brooklyn, Yugon Antong says he waited for 4 hours to get tested.
Honestly, I just think that they could take a better approach about, especially during wintertime, about standing in line right now, because even standing in here, you could even have a cold or get a cold just by standing outside.
Zach Katz, who also stood in line for hours, found a way to adapt to the long wait.
You got to talk to people in line. That's the key to making the line move fast.
For Lisa Carpolongo, months of virus restrictions have taken a toll, so she decided to fly home for the holidays to see family, but not before getting tested.
I think with the numbers rising and knowing that they want to see their families and the restrictions that their parents or themselves are putting on each other has been a little challenging.
Another challenge, lab warnings of chronic shortages of testing supplies. Scott Becker heads the Association of Public Health Laboratories.
We continue to see supply challenges in the laboratory community writ large. There will be a longer turnaround time, so that means there may be some longer delays in returning the results simply because things may get backlogged. We're not seeing that at the moment.
But that could change, he says.
As those cases increase, demand increases, turnaround time may increase.
As new infections reach an all-time high, officials at the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention are urging Americans not to travel or spend the Thanksgiving holiday with people outside their household. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
So to speak more about the COVID situation in the United States, let's quickly go back to Voice of America's Nova Pravati, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Nova, many Americans still seem to be traveling during the holiday season. How is this expected to affect the COVID numbers in the United States?
Well, Kancha, it's very interesting compared to India, which I hear a lot of the times that people go home for the holidays is a little bit more staggered depending on region. Usually from Dussehra to Chat, it's a lot of cities like Mumbai and also Delhi can expect to have a lot of people go home for the holidays. It's a little bit more quiet. It's usually the case too in Washington, D.C. and other cities. But you see behind me, there's still a lot of cars. Usually that's not the case during Thanksgiving and also the Thanksgiving weekend that we're in right now. That's what usually happens. Big cities empty out and a lot of people go home for the holidays. Now, we were expecting a lot of people not to go home for the holidays, but apparently a lot of people still decided to do so. According to the American Automobile Association, AAA, some 50 million people decided to still go home for the holidays. That's only a small drop compared to last year before the pandemic. Now, a lot of people, I have to say, are doing it as safely as possible. For instance, one of my yoga teachers, she stopped outdoor in-person classes a few weeks before Thanksgiving, and she said, no, I'm self-quarantining, and then I'm getting a COVID test, and then I'm going to my parents, and then I'm coming back, and then I'm self-quarantining. Some people are doing it safely, but what's concerning is people who may not be doing it safely, who may not be taking the virus seriously, because previous experience over the past year has shown that there's usually a spike in COVID cases after each major holiday, especially holidays that involve a lot of get-togethers, parties, whether with friends or family. We saw that at the start of the summer vacation, Memorial Day in May. We also saw that at the end of summer vacation in September, in early September. And we also saw that at the U.S. Independence Day holiday on July 4th. So there's a fear that Thanksgiving could end up being a super spreader if people are going home for the holidays and not taking care of themselves and their loved ones. But at least now we see 95% of people drive home for the holidays. And others use train, planes, and buses. And we see in those places, at least now there's plexiglass, everyone's wearing masks. There's a lot of social distancing. There's a lot of sanitizing. So we'll see whether it becomes a super spreader or whether it can be rather contained or whether there's a small bump, Akansha.
I'm sure there'll be numbers emerging soon after the festival season is over. Now, Nova, with COVID expected to be one of the priorities for the incoming Biden administration, what can we expect in the coming 2 months before Joe Biden takes office?
Well, what's interesting is over the past few weeks, there have been promising developments in terms of vaccines. There was Pfizer, then Moderna, and then the latest AstraZeneca. And the AstraZeneca one is apparently one which is the one to watch for countries like India because it uses a different sort of technology compared to the Pfizer and Moderna, which relied on RNA, whereas this one relied on weakened virus samples. And it does not need ultra cold refrigeration, which makes it much more easier to distribute in warmer weather climates like India. So at least these vaccines and perhaps more to come provide some tailwinds for the incoming Biden administration come Inauguration Day on January 20th. But also, we have to remember also his cabinet picks. One of his first picks, actually his very first pick, was as Chief of Staff, Ron Klain. And Ron Klain headed the Obama administration's response to Ebola, which is widely credited with helping to stop that from becoming more serious than it was. So we'll see what happens in the next 2 months, but you know, at least there are breakthroughs in the vaccines, including one which is more widely available to be distributed to emerging markets and warmer climates, and also the many capable, experienced hands that are expected to be in the Biden administration. But also, there's also the Biden administration is now, thanks to the transition process being formally underway, he's also privy to the information that the latest and the most precise information that the coronavirus task force also gets, along with the intelligence data that the president currently gets.
And in fact, it's a huge relief for the United States and, of course, the entire world that the transition process has finally begun. And, of course, still President-elect Joe Biden doesn't take over office. We'll keep coming back to you for all the latest details coming in from the United States. Thank you so much, Nova, for bringing us your inputs.